Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. This is Suzanne Sherman here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Today is Wednesday, June 27th, year of our Lord 2018. Have a special show today. We did do a show on Monday. Jeff Johnson had a special episode of The Paradigm Shift. Jeff's one of the founders of this network as well. His show, again, The Paradigm Shift, aired right before mine. We'll try and catch that on a replay later on. If you missed that this morning, we have, I think both of them are coming on today, but presently on the line with us right now in our little virtual studio is Mike MaHarry from the 10th Amendment Center. If you listen to my show, you usually hear at the beginning of it, I talk about the 10th Amendment Center, and I talk about Mike MaHarry's podcast and his email list. Mike, I want to just jump right in right now and welcome you to the show. How are you today?
Good morning, Suzanne. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I'm delighted to have you on. You know, we talk about defending ourselves, defending freedom and liberty from tyrannical and oppressive governments. And it's not just in Washington, D.C. You know, we talk about federalism being the answer and returning the power to the states. They rightfully had it to begin with. They created this government when they ratified the Constitution. But what we have now is an inversion of power. We have this presumption due to several clauses referred to as the elastic clause, like the supremacy clause, general welfare clause, commerce clause, even the preamble, we the people. It's been indoctrinated into our hearts and minds that the general government, now the national government, is the ultimate arbiter of what the law is going to be, and then the ultimate arbiter of how to interpret what that law is going to be is going to rest with Supreme Court justices. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not republicanism. It is not federalism. This is rule by a few. It is an oligarchy. Over at the 10th Amendment Center, I know they fight that. My articles on the 10th Amendment Center also focus on constitutional solutions to the current events and issues we have today, be it immigration, be it marijuana laws, which we're going to discuss in a little bit, firearms regulations. The answer is always going to be in the constitutional intent as it was ratified. What did the states, what did the ratifiers agree to? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart and soul of government by the consent. It operates via the consent of the governed. This is a principle that goes back to our very foundation in the Declaration of Independence. I had somebody on my news feed, I saw a post that said, you know, there's no parade for the 4th of July in Salt Lake City. We really need to have a parade to celebrate the Constitution. I thought, really? So last week and also on Monday, I was discussing, is the Constitution a guarantee of our liberty? Because somebody actually told me the Constitution gives you your rights. And we had a very long debate on my wall. I hear you laughing. No, it gives us no rights. And this is why we have to understand, people seem to think that the Constitution, every aspect of it is the law of the land, except for the 10th Amendment. Mike, it seems like the 10th Amendment doesn't even exist when we have these conversations. Tell us a little bit about the 10th Amendment Center. And right now you are fighting, we have issues at not only the national level, trying to get back to the 10th Amendment and what it really stands for, what it was intended to do. And also you've got a little battle of your own going on locally. I tell people you got to fight tyranny from your local homeowners association, town council, up to the county, through the state, all the way up. Start where you can effectuate a change. What's going on with you, Mike? Let's talk about the 10th Amendment Center and your work there.
Well, the 10th Amendment Center, for anybody who's not familiar, and if you're not, shame on you, you can visit us at 10thamendmentcenter.com. And, you know, really at the core, what we're about is decentralization. And when you break it all down, that was the structure of government that the founders envisioned. A decentralized system where most of the power resided at the state, local level, and with the people. The federal government was to have very little impact on our everyday lives. And then, like you said, we've inverted that pyramid. Now, everything emanates from Washington, D.C., and the states and local governments have basically turned into little subdivisions of the big national glob. And we fight that aggressively at the 10th Amendment Center because we believe very strongly that the more you concentrate power at the top, the more dangerous it is to our liberty. Government's dangerous at any level. And we'll get into that a little bit in just a minute about what's happened with me right here in my own city. But when you concentrate that power further up and put it over more people and put fewer people, quote unquote, in charge, it is a threat to our liberty. That's not the system that was intended. So at the 10th Amendment Center, we're trying to flip that pyramid back the right way. We're taking state, local, and even individual action to undermine federal overreach, to do things like stop the unconstitutional war on marijuana, to stop federal health care, to stop pervasive warrantless surveillance. You have options and things you can do at your state and local level to fight these things. You don't have to count on your congressman or, heaven forbid, some robed overlord at the Supreme Court. So that's really what we do. And for more information, please visit 10thamendmentcenter.com and check out what we're doing. We've got main page articles. We've got a blog that will show a lot of the bills that we're tracking and fighting for in state legislatures and even in city halls.
And Mike, you also have email lists that go out, and I believe you have your own website with some of your own musings, I think, which come out on Monday, and your own podcast. Let's get into that a little bit, and then we're going to get in the meat and taters of this discussion.
Yeah, I have my own website, michaelmaharry.com, and I have a little podcast. I call it Thoughts from MaHarry Head, which is really ironic because my head's not really very hairy. And, it's just a quick 10-minute podcast focusing on constitutional issues and political decentralization. I do it about once a week. Some weeks I don't, but generally I do. And then I'll post other things up there. I think the most popular part of my website is my Constitution 101 section, where you can actually click on that link and you'll see articles on those clauses that you mentioned, the Supremacy Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, the General Welfare Clause. And you can go through those articles and find out exactly what the founders intended, what they said that these things were supposed to mean. And that seems to be where a lot of the traffic on my website goes. And just for a future look ahead, I'm actually in the process of finishing up a book called Constitution 101 that's going to aggregate all of that and expand on it and kind of touch on all of these clauses from a 10th perspective. And Brian McClanahan, people might be familiar with him, great historian. He was gracious enough to write a nice foreword for this book. So I'm really excited. I hope to have it out in the fall. So.
Well, I look forward to that, and I will definitely have you on the show. Well, before then, but when that comes out, interestingly enough, I got up early this morning in an attempt to organize some of my paperwork and notes, and one of the ones that I found was Constitution 101, Judiciary and Judicial Review. We have this de facto acceptance, and in fact, I was on a radio show out here in Sandy, Utah, where the host of the show actually said, we need the Supreme Court to tell us what the law of the nation is. Otherwise, we are going to have fighting in the streets. And I just looked at him, I said, we have fighting in the streets already because 5 politically connected lawyers in their black government-issued dresses pretend to say what the law is. Every issue becomes a national issue and a point of contention. And we are not getting decisions that ultimately protect one of the fundamental tenets of our government, life, liberty, and property. Speaking of life, in the state of Oklahoma, the primary election yesterday, a man by the name of Dan Fisher was running for governor. I had him on my show, and he was running on a platform, one of which was really focused on federalism. And an aspect of federalism is to go against what Tom Mullen refers to, the judicial temple monkeys, handed down was a case called Roe versus Wade that supposedly legalized abortion in every state in this continental landmass. A man who was instrumental in supporting Dan Fisher and being very outspoken on Facebook and what this race meant is joining us today. And I've got two of the powerhouses, two of my biggest influences today, Mike MaHarry and Mark Kreslins, now just joined our group as well. Mark Kreslins, I want to welcome you to the show.
Hey, can we be honest here? I'm much bigger than Mike MaHarry.
I was waiting for that. I'll never forget that prank you pulled on me when I told you he was coming on my show.
How's it going, brother MaHarry?
It's good to hear your voice, and I will concede that you are bigger than me, and we'll just leave it at that.
All right, we're going to get the scales out because I think I got you guys.
Okay. All right, you got me. You got me. No, thanks for having me on, Suzanne. We had a remarkable time last night, and you know, Mike, you know this, and Suzanne, you know this. Tell me the first candidate in your data banks that you remember running on the abolition of abortion using state sovereignty to do so.
Yeah, nobody.
No.
In fact, you know, I would say that really, he was the first candidate that I've seen that was really 100% all in on the concept of state nullification and state sovereignty. We've had some guys that tinker around the edges of it, but Dan was all in, and I really appreciate that. And I think he did. I think he did a lot to advance the legitimacy of what is happening all across the country right now.
Oh, I'm totally with you, Mike. We went last night to the watch party, and I had to stay separate for the last part of the campaign because we had formed a 501c4 organization to help Dan get the message out, and so the two entities had to stay separate. But last night, when it became clear Dan was not going to make the runoff, I went over to the campaign headquarters and sat there and talked to folks and let them know that this was a major victory because of what you just said. Number one, no candidate has ever run on this. Dan was actually a believer in this. He wasn't just this. This wasn't some clever political ploy, you know, to try to get Fisher into the governor's mansion. This was to paradigm shift, using Jeff's show's name. This was to begin the process of shifting a paradigm, and we had two 100% branded issue, i.e. abortion, and then a secondary issue, state sovereignty, to facilitate the ability to abolish abortion. And so last night, our vote total ended up at around 36,000 abolitionists in this state. So June of 2017, the history books will record there were probably 300 abolitionists in the state. Of that 300, you know, a small percentage even understood state sovereignty. Now here in June of 2018, 36,000 people went to the polls yesterday voting for a candidate who put out a very clear plan of how he was going to abolish abortion in Oklahoma. It was a 6-point plan, and how he was going to openly defy Washington, D.C. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. 36,000 people in Oklahoma believed they were voting for a candidate who, had he prevailed, would have abolished abortion by asserting state sovereignty, by defying Washington, D.C. That is a major move. The paradigm in many people's minds shifted. Now we have to continue the work. And because I was reading William Wilberforce's first speech, I think it was back in 1793, when he stood up there in Parliament, and he gave his first rousing speech towards abolishing slavery. Now imagine that. He's one, standing up in a crowd of hecklers, but he understood that this was the only way to go. And he had the courage of his convictions, and that we all know the story. By 1733, Great Britain passes the Abolition Act, and slavery across the pond is abolished. Well, it began in 1793 with one person standing up. So we have Dan Fisher standing up, one person, saying, follow me, we're going to abolish abortion, and we're going to use this historic tool called asserting state sovereignty to do it. And 36,000 people nodded yesterday and said, we're with you. Now we have to connect with those people, and that's what we're actively involved in here in the next few weeks.
You know, Mark, when I saw the results come in, at first I was very disheartened, but I read your commentary and again, what you said right now, this truly is not the victory that we'd hoped for, but I think, as you said, this has really informed people as to this notion of state sovereignty, and that just because of a court opinion does not bind the states. The other thing is, Dan's campaign was so educational with regards to the atrocious nature of human abortion. It's the murder of fetuses. The images were graphic. They were difficult to see. The presentations were powerful. And I'm sitting here thinking that I can't imagine that, notwithstanding this political loss, that some people's eyes and hearts and souls have been opened, and perhaps some babies' lives will be changed as we continue this struggle. I have a feeling Free the States is not going away.
Oh, no.
I have the feeling this is not the last we've heard of this issue. But again, I think the biggest obstacle you had to face was, the right of a woman to kill her baby, should it not be convenient. One of the arguments I heard was, well, are you going to adopt these children that are unwanted? Being inconvenient is not a death sentence.
No.
And the biggest obstacle, again, the Supreme Court has spoken. Again, nullification. Mike, you wrote a book called The Power of No. Can you briefly get into what nullification is and how we can effectuate it based on, and I'll let Mark then elaborate on these local political challenges?
Well, at the 10th Amendment Center, we basically define nullification as any action or set of actions that has the effect of rendering a federal law null, void, or simply ineffectual within a state. So at the 10th Amendment Center, the strategy that we've taken primarily is a strategy of non-cooperation. Particularly in issues where the state has to do something to help the federal government. So, for instance, the federal government needs state and local assistance to enforce gun control laws. The state and local government says, no, we're not going to help. That doesn't take the law off the books, but it makes it almost impossible for the federal government to enforce the action. And we're seeing that with marijuana, another issue that came up yesterday in Oklahoma. Oklahomans voted to legalize medical marijuana despite federal prohibition, despite the Supreme Court saying in Raich that the federal prohibition is perfectly legitimate and constitutional. Oklahomans said no to that, and their willingness to just not enforce federal law will effectively nullify it in the state. Now, you can take nullification a step farther, and I think this is what Dan Fisher was looking at, and basically just stand up and say no, because there's really nothing that a state can do. You know, there's no cooperation between the state and federal government when it comes to abortion, but a state can just say no, Supreme Court, bite me, in effect. And what is the federal government going to do about it? And I really liked what Mark said, and it reminded me of Rosa Parks. I actually just wrote an article about her not too long ago, and it was one person. And there were a couple of people before her, I'll grant you, but it was one person saying, you know what? No, I'm not going to follow this unjust law.
Yep.
Come what may, I'm not going to do it. And there were consequences. And when a state finally gets the guts to stand up against Washington, D.C., there probably will be consequences. They'll cut funding, or who knows what they'll do. But at some point, you've got to be willing to say no. And we saw a step in that direction with Dan. And I think, like Mark said, I think it could potentially be something that reverberates. And we look back at this in 10 or 15 years and say, wow, that was really the start of something huge.
Yeah, rather than saying, well, nice try, thanks a lot, let's move on. I think what was also very encouraging and a little bit scary. I mean, this is pushing the envelope here. This is going beyond non-compliance and non-cooperation. This is going and saying we are going to criminalize an act the Supreme Court said we must allow. So when the state police go to shut down those killing centers, it puts the general government, the national government, into very tenuous position of sending what? Are they going to send federal troops there to take the state police away so babies can be murdered? What do you think, Mark? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, and this is we wanted to be big and bold because bold ideas win the day. They actually win. They're a little scary when people hear them because we've been so conditioned to think, oh, can we really do that? This is kind of the slave mentality that has slipped into the American psyche. And certainly here in Oklahoma, we saw that. So the only way you deal with that is not to try to talk them out of their fear, but to offer them a countervailing solution that was big and bold, and if successful, would actually meet the objectives of the people that were heretofore fearful of the government. So we came up with a 6-point plan. Number one, we were going to call on the legislature to send a bill of abolition to the governor. That'd be Fisher at that point. And now, if they planted their feet, now think about this. If Fisher had won, he'd have gone in with a mandate from the people. The people would have been behind him. And we both, the three of us, share a friend named Don Livingston. And Don has coached me over the years, has been very influential in my life in understanding societal change. And one of the things that reverberated in my mind that came out in this campaign is that you have to delegitimize the existing power structures in order to bring about massive societal shift. So obviously you go back to 1770s, right? And in 1773, they passed the Molasses Act, and the American identity people, who are the colonists at that point, get their first real, oh gosh, the king is going to make us pay something. He's going to force us to do something that may be against our will. So they got this first kind of hint that we are under this man's rule. Now think about it. It took 43 years from 1733 to 1776 for them to not only disagree with the king, but go to war with him. Now, what happened in those 43 years? The brilliant propagandists and people we call the founders and agitators back then had to uncouple the affections and devotion the average American had to their king, King George. We have to remember that. These people are subjects of the king, and many of them have been raised to love the king, to love being part of the British Empire, to the largest force in the world at that point. There was all this kind of nostalgic feeling they had towards the empire. And think about Sam Adams' job and Patrick Henry's job, thinking about, well, how do we uncouple these people from loving their king, loving being a subject of the king, and how do we agitate and provoke people to break that coupling? Well, you've got to delegitimize the king. You've got to say he's actually a bad guy. He's actually hurting you. So Don and I talked about this a great deal over the years about delegitimizing the current power structures we deal with. So what is one of them? Is what Mike just referred to, and you referred to, Suzanne. And by the way, I need to give credit where credit is due. The first time I heard 9 politically connected lawyers in black dresses, it was Michael Bolden at some conference I was at with him somewhere. And I thought, what a clever way to put that. That is really brilliant. So these 9 politically connected lawyers in black dresses need to be delegitimized. They actually need to be seen as a mockery to common sense. And so we took that tack down here. We use that phrase quite a bit, by the way. Dan used that phrase in campaign stumps and places he was. And people, they heard it. I was at many of these events, guys, and I got to tell you, you could see the paradigm shift right in there, right at that moment, because there's an itch inside everybody that says something's wildly wrong here. I may not be able to put my finger on it, but something's wildly wrong here. And Fisher comes along and says, yeah, the problem is those unelected 9 politically connected lawyers in black robes telling us what to do. That's what's wrong. And we're not going to do it. So we're going to order the legislature. I'm going to order the legislature to give me a bill of abolition. I'm going to sign that bill with my right hand, and my left hand, I'm going to be on the phone with the state police. They're going to be set up around the abortion clinics. And the minute that ink is on that paper, I'm going to give the order to the Department of Public Safety to order those troopers to close those clinics down. They're going to go in there with guns. They're going to go in there and say, because a murder might be happening. Now, if a murder was happening at Walmart, would we say, hey, police officers, you just kind of stay out here and observe what's going on, wait for a good time? No, you go in. They're first responders for a reason. You go in and you stop the murder. Well, this is the common sense. So when we would say, those troopers are going to go in there and they're going to walk out with those doggone doctors in handcuffs. And you know the woman who had an abortion, who's there trying to murder her baby, we're going to send her to the emergency room, but then she's going to be charged with murder. I got to tell you, folks, I was at many of those meetings, and people's minds, that you could see their eyes clarify. They realize, oh my gosh, that is murder. One of Dan's lines was, we don't treat the death of a baby as murder because we don't believe it's murder. Because if we really believed it was murder, wouldn't we intervene? Well, what's stopping us? These illegitimate, non-politically connected lawyers in black dresses. So after we arrest the doctors, arrest the woman, we've now got them in our custody. That had to happen in about 10 minutes. So the whole day was going to be choreographed. We'd have those people in custody by 9:30. They'd be in our custody at that point. They would be allowed due process, of course. They would be able to retain an attorney. They'd be able to bond out and all that, but they would be in our custody. Now, that would all happen before the ACLU could run off to some federal judge and try to, give us an injunction that we can't do this. Well, if we choreographed it right, that all happened before the federal judge could get his first cup of coffee, and they're in our custody. Now, what are they going to do? What are they really going to do? Are they going to send the U.S. Marshals down here? They're in our jail. Well, Dan's going to order the Department of Corrections to stand his ground, and he'll come over there and stand with him in the jail. Got this potential of a head-to-head with the federal government. Dan ain't moving. And we're going to have our troopers. Now, does Trump want that kind of tension? No, no. We are not back in the 1860s, any 50s and 60s, guys. As we see, Mike, you know this well, we see out in Colorado. Has the 4th Infantry Division stormed into Colorado yet and occupied and closed down all those? I'm unaware of that happening. Maybe
or California.
California. Yeah.
How many states have gone against federal marijuana laws now?
You just have to have courage. That's it. These guys will crumble. I'm telling you, they will crumble when some state decides to say no. Not a non-compliant no, but like we were doing here in Oklahoma, we are going to openly tell you we are not going to follow your law because it's an opinion.
Mark, earlier you mentioned it was 43 years between the Molasses Act and then these other movements that became so politically successful.
Right.
They did not have the benefit that we have right now of access to mass amount of people with social media and the ability to communicate. And with these alternative sources of radio like we're doing right now, you're not hearing this discussion, I can guarantee you right now, on any other mainstream or even alternative media source. This is right here. These are absolute answers and solutions. People get on me on social media. Suzanne, all you do is complain you have no solutions. I said, absolutely, I have solutions. Listen to the radio show. Read the articles that we share and promote. It can be done. We're not going away. This is, after talking to you, I realized this isn't the end of a movement. It is the very beginning of one. In fact, I think we're seeing similar legislation and fights going on in Ohio. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, we are. And I will say this. So we're going to run a bill of abolition. Senator Joseph Silk is going to run this bill next February. It's going to be a stringent bill of abolition, and we hope to put 10,000 people down there in the Capitol and tell these doggone legislators who all ran as pro-life, you doggone better fulfill your oath of office now. You said you were going to do this. And so agitation and accountability is coming out of Oklahoma. This fight is just now engaged. I mean, it took us getting to this point. Mike, you and I have been in these trenches for well over a decade. And it's been building. And this is kind of like the Molasses Act, isn't it? I mean, you guys started with the 10th Amendment Center, 2006, somewhere around there?
It was. We just had our 12th anniversary on Monday.
Amazing. Now think about that. A guy, Michael Bolden, and then eventually you have this harebrained idea that we're going to start studying the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and we're going to create a whole movement called the 10th Amendment Center that is going to affect hundreds of thousands of people's lives who are going to be empowered to believe they can defy the federal government based on this constitutional provision. 12 years later, this is taking on different forms. More and more people now are saying, yeah, we can actually do this. We can do this because it's been done. And now we've got a state that's saying, we're going to go right after it. We're going to take it. We're going to put it on steroids. And the 10th Amendment is going to go on steroids.
Yeah. I had a question from our listener, Andrew, asking, will the 10th Amendment Center and Free the States be competitive or cooperative? And if so, how? I see us as all working together and cooperating. And I think this show right now is an example of that. Mike, you want to answer that? And Mark, I know you have to leave at the half.
I actually have to leave right now. Can I just say one thing to that?
Yes.
I don't like MaHarry and Bolden very much. So we're going after him. We're taking the 10th Amendment Center down.
Oh, yeah.
It's on,
you bring it, dude. Bring it.
I love Mike MaHarry and Michael Bolden. Are you kidding me? We're side by side and all this stuff.
I can't even imagine how we would compete. I can't imagine how we would compete.
How would we compete? Yeah, no, we're good. I love those guys.
Mark, I know you have to go. I want to thank you so much for being on. We will. We're getting your headsets back on. The fight is on. We're just getting started, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Kreslins, who has been working diligently to get Dan Fisher elected. The fight is just beginning. It is not over. You will hear more from him on this topic. Mike, I want to turn to you because, as I mentioned earlier, we've got fights at every single level. The other federalism level that we saw in Oklahoma, there was success on one aspect, and that was with medical marijuana. I want to touch on that, and then I want to get into your issue with Lexington, Kentucky. I'll let you share your thoughts. I think Michael Bolden had a quick article out on the Oklahoma voters passing medical marijuana law despite federal prohibition. I also have an article out from the 10th Amendment Center called Parchment and Plants, What Prohibition Can Teach Us About Medical Marijuana. Run with that, then let's jump over to Lexington.
Yeah, I want to say something just real quick.
Sure.
You know, this idea that somehow that Kreslins organization and the 10th Amendment Center would somehow be in competition. I want people to be perfectly clear. We're not about some kind of political turf war. We're not, trying to raise millions of dollars. If we were trying to raise millions of dollars, believe me, we wouldn't be talking about nullification.
Right.
We're in this because we believe in these principles. We believe in decentralization. I mean, Bolden and I aren't getting rich doing this. I'm sure Mark's not getting rich. It's not about. And I guess it kind of goes to this mentality that so many people in this country have is that politics is a bunch of teams and you have to be on one team and this team has to fight that team. And I'm not into the whole team thing. Let's, if we agree on a principle, or even if we can get a coalition together and agree on an issue and get something done, let's do it and not do dumb turf wars. That's a pet peeve. So.
Oh, mine too. And I'm tired of it. I had a post the other day about feel-good platitudes that do nothing but perpetuate the status quo. And the ones that I hear my pet peeve is, and this was Dr. Mike Kennedy out here who was running against Mitt Romney, who unfortunately he lost his bid, but his statement was, I am pro-Second Amendment and pro-life. Well, as we just learned, neither one of them, particularly with regards to the pro-life movement, means pro-life. It just means pro-continuing to regulate the murder of babies. There's nothing pro-life about that. So what we're seeing now with marijuana laws is, as you mentioned, the state governments are saying, we're going to ignore the Controlled Substances Act, and we are going to either regulate by legalizing it. I personally am for decriminalization, get the government out of it completely. But we're seeing medical marijuana. That's a big step in Oklahoma. And I think we also had an initiative for this in Utah. I personally will not vote against it. I will not vote for it because it does create another layer of government. If you want to have any final touches on that, but I do want to save time for your article or your issue in Lexington as well.
Yeah, I'll just say it's a huge step. I would have never dreamed, even 4 years ago, that one of the reddest of red states, Oklahoma, would legalize medical marijuana. And it's a very broad medical marijuana law. So this is a huge step. Oklahoma is the 32nd state in the United States that has legalized medical marijuana to some degree. And as you mentioned, Utah legalized it for a very narrow range of things. They made it part of their right to try bill in the last legislative session. So people that are terminally ill will be able to have access to marijuana. And in Utah, which is probably redder than Oklahoma, especially as far as kind of a religious conservatism that would be very anti-marijuana. This is just absolutely huge. We have 32 states that have simply said, you know what, federal government, we believe that this plant has medical benefits and we're going to legalize it. And I understand where you're coming from. I'm the same with you. I'd like to see the government completely get out of it. But we have found through our work that usually the small steps end up leading to bigger steps. We've seen several medical marijuana programs expand over the last couple of years. Medical marijuana tends to be a stepping stone towards full legalization. So I think even the smallest step is a good step forward when it comes to defying the feds.
Yeah, and I, in good conscience, could never vote against people who want to obey the law and be law-abiding citizens. And if that is the only thing keeping them from the only source of relief that they can get, I can't in good conscience vote against it. I don't know if I would support it by voting for it, because again, I've got this thing about creating a bureaucracy that's going to forever foreclose the possibility of decriminalization. Because Mike, unless you can come up with an example of when we've created a government bureaucracy that just sort of poof and went away on its own, I'll change my stance on that. But I don't see that happening. They get these jobs and they, by golly, want to keep them. In Lexington, Kentucky, you noticed some cameras. What's the story?
I did indeed. So this goes back to last summer. It's been almost a year ago now that I noticed some surveillance cameras put up in a park that's just a few blocks from my home. And, you know, having worked with the 10th Amendment Center and surveillance being one of the primary issues that I focused on over the last 3 or 4 years, it set off warning bells. I'm like, what is this? What's going on? And what else is the city doing? So I did what any enterprising journalist would do. I issued some open records requests to the police department and basically asked, what kind of surveillance equipment are you guys using? And I came to find out that they operate and own 29 what they call mobile surveillance cameras. Now, you might be asking, Mike, what is a mobile surveillance camera? And I'd have to say, Suzanne, I have no idea, because they won't tell me. This is a big secret. And so the police department have tried to hide these documents behind a couple of exceptions in the open records law. The first step was I went to the Attorney General, which is the process in Kentucky. I said, hey, I'm appealing their refusal to give me these documents. The Attorney General ruled in my favor. They said that the exceptions in the open records law they were trying to use was bogus. And so the city's solution, instead of abiding by the Attorney General's decision and turning over information about these super secret spy cameras, is they sued me. And so we went on a lawsuit. And this was clearly a bullying tactic. I mean, let's be honest. They thought that this is some dude. All we got to do is file a lawsuit on him. He's not going to have the financial resources or the energy to pursue a lawsuit, and he'll just go away. Well, they picked on the wrong guy, because first off, I'm very fortunate that I have some connections. And second off, I'm just not the type of person to just go away. And was very fortunate to have the ACLU of Kentucky represent me as legal counsel. And so we fought this and we prevailed in court. We had a hearing about 8 weeks ago. And last week, the judge came back with the decision and said, city government, you're full of crap. These exceptions that you're trying to argue, they don't hold up. You've not proved your case. Give MaHarry the documents. So they've got 30 days. They can appeal. At this point, I don't know if they will or if they won't. I'm about 60-40 or maybe even 50-50. It could go either way.
What were they trying to accomplish by suing you? Were they going for monetary damages, injunctive relief to make you go away? What was the claim? What were they going after?
So basically, and this is another problem, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but this is a function of the way the open records law in Kentucky is written. If the first appeal is to the Attorney General, either party, if the Attorney General rules against them, has the option of going to the court system via lawsuit. So that's how the statute was written. So when the city lost, they decided that they were going to go for that and sue me. And basically all they're trying to do is get that Attorney General decision overturned and not have to release the documents. But interestingly, in the lawsuit, they actually asked for me to pay their attorney's fees, which this is—
You already did.
Yeah, exactly. And this is funny to me because, you know, you get these people that'll give you this whole, well, we are the government. So what? I'm suing myself? I don't get it. But anyway, so yeah, it was, like I said, it was clearly a bullying tactic as much as anything. But obviously they want to keep these cameras secret. And, you know, it's funny because whenever I talk about surveillance, every single time I'll get that person who'll say, well, Mike, if you don't have anything to hide, what do you have to fear? And so I've turned that around and I say, city of Lexington, if you don't have anything to hide, what do you have to fear? What are you trying to keep secret? And you know, here's the thing. Secrecy is toxic to liberty. When government can do things in secret that we don't know about, at some point, it is going to be abused. And we have a city here in Lexington that is operating a surveillance system that apparently has no oversight. We have no idea what criteria that they have for these cameras. We don't even know what the cameras are. We don't know how they're handling the data. We don't know how it's being shared. We don't know what they're doing to protect the privacy of innocent. We don't know anything about it. All of this is
facial recognition software technology.
They say they don't have that. Now, you know.
Okay.
Do they? We'll find out, hopefully. Yeah. So the bottom line is they've got 30 days to either appeal or hand over those documents. So one way or the other, we'll have some more news coming up here next month, and we'll let everybody know what's going on, because I think either way it's going to be interesting.
Well, and their tactics for going after you and suing you, again, it's a bullying tactic. I remember seeing a video of a conference or a city council meeting where a man that had the wherewithal, the financial means by which to challenge an eminent domain action by the city council, and the councilwoman was livid that this guy could afford to challenge them. They knew that over the rank and file minion citizens, they could just steamroll them and get their way. And that's what they were expecting with you. And I used to be of that mindset as well. Well, you know, when the Patriot Act came out, 9/11 was so horrific. Well, you know, this was so horrible. Clearly, if we're going to be safe, we want them reading all our emails. We want them listening to our phone calls, because if you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. You had a really great answer to that as well. If you have something to hide, if you know you have nothing to hide, what did you say that people should do about your browsing records?
Yeah, this is my challenge to the if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear people. If you really truly believe that in your heart of hearts, download your browsing history. You can do that. It's pretty easy on Google. You can get your browsing history like forever. Download that, email it to me, and I'll post it on my website. Because if you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to fear. Now, when you do this, you can't go and edit it. You know, don't take out important sites and you know, whatever other weird things that you've been searching for, what websites you've been visiting. Nobody's going to do that. And here's the thing, and I've made this point on several radio shows the last couple of days. Privacy is a fundamental part of being an autonomous human being. If we believe in self-ownership, and I think most people, when you really push them, will say, yeah, I own myself. Well, part of that is having boundaries around yourself. And privacy is an integral part of that. It is a fundamental part of being a free, autonomous human being. It's why we have curtains on our windows. It's why we have locks on our doors. We all intuitively want privacy, whether or not we have something to hide or not. And let me make this very clear. We all have something to hide, or potentially have something to hide. And I tell this, usually people who give you this line are kind of on the right. You know, you get your conservatives, your thin blue line, law and order type people. They're also the ones who tend to be, well, they'll take my gun from my cold, dead hands. Well, you know how they're going to find you to get your gun? They're going to use the surveillance state that you've been cheerleading for the last 10 years.
Exactly.
So, you know, people have to think ahead. We cannot trust government. And I've told people here in Lexington has a pretty decent police department. I really haven't had, we don't have the racial tensions that you have in a lot of city. We don't have cops going around shooting dogs. I've seen a number of cases where they've dealt with people with mental illnesses. They've done it very professionally without using excessive force. So, you know, we have it pretty good here in Lexington as far as our law enforcement goes. But I still don't trust them, because you shouldn't trust anybody with power. It's like Lord Acton said, you know, absolute power corrupts, or power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when they can operate in secret, when they can do whatever they want with nobody watching, when there's no transparency, when there's no oversight, that's where you get in trouble. So what we're pushing for, just real quick to finish up, we have an organization that I've started here. It's called We See You Watching Lexington. And our website is WeSeeYouWatchingLexington.com if you want to see kind of what we're doing for local activism on surveillance. What we're pushing for is an ordinance that would require all government agencies in the city to get government approval from the city council before they obtain or use any type of surveillance equipment. It would require them to create a surveillance plan. They would have to outline how they're going to use it, how privacy is going to be protected, how they're going to handle the data and the information. All of that would have to be outlined first, and then it would have to be passed by the council before they could use it. That way we can have the debate about whether or not government should have X, Y, or Z before it comes to some poor schmuck getting sued. So that's what we're working on, and we're real excited about the prospects of getting that done.
Keep me posted. This is Mike MaHarry from the 10th Amendment Center, and he was been discussing a We See You Lexington, Kentucky, about the transparency of local government with police surveillance. Mike, I know you have to go. You've got another radio show coming up. Do you want to announce so people can follow up and listen to you?
I do. I'm going to be on the Scott Horton show. If people are not familiar with Scott Horton, you really should be. He's probably one of the leading people in the United States on foreign policy. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we just talked about, and I'm sure that we'll probably bunny trail into the broader surveillance and foreign policy issues that are implicated in even what's going on at the local level. So that's the Scott Horton show, and we're going to be on there in just a few minutes.
Well, I will let you go.
Can I just interject here real quick? There's always a Patrick Henry quote that can come up.
Yes.
About anything. Well, Patrick Henry said, "Liberty will never be secure when the transactions of rulers may be concealed from the people."
Ooh, that's good. I got to steal that.
Yes, we'll expound upon that. Mike, you were generous with your time. I don't want to go over. So next time you say no, I tried to get off on time last time and you wouldn't let me. So I appreciate your coming to our little show. You are a big deal, and I am delighted to be able to publish articles for the 10th Amendment Center as well. I'll get on some more soon. Everybody, 10th Amendment Center, Mike MaHarry, Constitution 101, MikeMaHarry.com. So much information. Spend some time there. You will know more about federalism and what consent of the governed means than any federal judge. Mike, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Suzanne. It's always a pleasure, and I will look forward to being back on soon.
Okay, take care. Hey, Jeff, you and I will run away with some of this stuff a little bit here. You know, Mike was talking a little bit about government that is not transparent and how dangerous that is. We've been talking about tyrannical governments and infringements upon our freedom from both the local level, here what we saw in the city of Lexington, Kentucky. We're talking about it at a state level with regards to the nullification of federal marijuana laws, with regards to medical marijuana in Utah, in Oklahoma, successful yesterday, California, all these other states that are eschewing this, and then also the fighting of abortion. That was a very successful first step. Look at what happens now on the national, pardon my French, level when we do not have transparency in government. We have had this runaway, corrupt, egregiously bad behavior, which the Inspector General's report now is revealing that went straight down from the Obama administration. We knew. Now information is coming to light that Obama himself lied. There's a surprise for you about Hillary Clinton's server and the email server and his knowledge of it. He said, "I found out with the rest of everybody." And guess what? He had participated in using that email server. The Inspector General's report was damning in its conclusions, its revelations, the corruption of the FBI, the DOJ, Hillary Clinton, the Obama administration. So what happened? Also, President Trump was very successful in his negotiations with North Korea. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is going too well for President Trump right now. We're going to have a crisis. And I was actually fearful that it was going to be yet another shooting. Fortunately, it was not, but we did have another crisis. It was a feigned one. It was a made-up one, and this was the children being separated from their families crisis. So now this was emanating from a law that was signed by Bill Clinton. It was observed in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, but if you follow the media rhetoric right now, you would be under the impression that no other human being or entity in the history of mankind ever separated a child from their parents other than Donald Trump, the personification of evil. These people were absolutely unhinged, grabbing this talking point and just hanging on to it like a pit bull. Rational thought wasn't a part of their rhetoric at all. So I wanted to talk a few minutes. I don't have a lot of time. I know we're running out here, but this goes back. We have to think of what are they trying to do with this mass migration, both legal and illegal. If you go back to the 1965 Immigration Act, there's an article that a friend of mine published a while back. It's not online anymore, but it was a great article when Donald Trump was running for president. It was called the Paleo Conservatives' Advice or Plea to Candidate Donald Trump. It was written by a friend of mine, James Rutledge Resch. I'm going to see if we can get him to publish this again. But he talks about the Immigration Act that changed the traditional balance that we had for two centuries of the competing interests when it came to immigration, new labor for a westward expanding country, and a growing economy while preserving America's national identity. Well, the 1965 Immigration Act had overturned this policy, and the scale and shape of immigration had become revolutionized. Around the world, and assimilable European immigrants were replaced by alien Latinos, Asians, Middle Easterners, and Africans. At the same time, we had a cultural revolution in the 1960s that undermined traditional institutions, family and community as well, leaving the culture and economy unable to assimilate immigrants as they did in the past. A single law has in just a few generations transformed the United States into a whole new country. Obama's fundamental transformation had nothing on this act right here. So what we have now, immigration, both legal and illegal, has become a subsidized mass migration movement masterminded by the left, my friend James says, to import a new constituency of welfare-dependent, uneducated, alienated poor from the former third world, and thus elect a new electorate. Immigration is not actually immigration anymore, but it is a social engineering wealth redistribution, big government program. Illegal immigration is now a noticeable problem. It became as early as the 1950s. It has become a crisis completely out of control. There are now more illegal than legal immigrants in the United States. Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on the state of Virginia, it would be more turbulent, less happy, less strong. We may believe that the addition of 500,000 foreigners to our present numbers would produce a similar effect here. The dissolution of the American national identity, the article continues, is nothing at which to shrug, which many left libertarians even cavalierly do, James says. A country's culture transcends its government and thus can be and has been seen as a powerful bulwark against tyranny when checks and balances, separation of powers, and other legal limitations fail. The power of the culture is why we had, for instance, the Jacobins purging France of its French culture, and why the Bolsheviks tried to crush the local cultures of the Soviet states. In the place of being French or Russian, they would be citizens and comrades. And this is very crucial here. A common culture can unite the people against tyrants, but tyrants can easily divide and rule an acultural or multicultural people. Folks, that is the heart and soul of what this fight is about, trying to divide us while at the same time giving us these platitudes of diversity, yet we have to be unified. It is impossible, particularly when you have over 320 million people on a continental landmass who have lost their sense of self-government, their ability to accept that they should be self-governing, turning towards the individuals, the politically connected lawyers in their black dresses we talked about earlier in the show, looking towards the solution of our problems from Washington, D.C. These people, as Mark Kreslins has said before on my show, he used to be a senior legislative assistant. When he was on the staff and would get letters from constituents, the representative for whom he worked never even saw, let alone read the concerns. Rather, you get a form letter back saying, thank you, I will take your letter into consideration. And they never do. So now we're seeing this capitalization on a false crisis to detract what we should be focusing on. And these are the recent successes, and I'll give credit where credit is due, of President Trump and the light that has been shed on the corruption of this deep state, corrupt general government. Jeff, did you want to chime in a little bit? You got really shut out at the beginning of this show with everybody we had on here.
I know, that's okay. Those guys are definitely far better to listen to than me. So I didn't mind. I
just put my feet up. I'm happy being the dumb one in the room when those two are on.
Yeah, those two are definitely heavyweights when it comes to the whole idea of federalism. And I hope Mark is able to come back on every once in a while, a little bit more regularly now that this campaign's over, because there's a wealth of knowledge there. And as far as this whole idea of what's going on with the immigration, I spoke to it on my show. There's the idea that if they come here illegally, somehow they're going to become good citizens. I mean, they start out by breaking laws. I don't see how that changes, because I gave another example of another illegal alien that killed, in this case, 3 people in a car accident. I know personally somebody that lost a son to an illegal immigrant that killed him in a car accident. There is a reason for laws. Now, we're talking 2 different things here, because you and I agree that the federal government should not be involved in the immigration side of it. Naturalization, yes, the states need to be involved in it, but the problem is, again, that we have a government that is giving benefit to people that break our laws, and that's why they come here. They aren't going to stop as long as we keep doing
we have a show. On the next time we do a show, I want to talk about how our war on drugs is actually pushing more migrants across our borders. I found another article too explaining how our actions in, say, Honduras is also pushing this migration. And we are creating a lot of carnage and destabilization in these governments that these people are trying to escape. A wall isn't going to fix that. We have to stop, first of all, our behavior that's egregiously destabilizing these areas. The people are trying to escape the carnage we are causing. They are also invited here by the magnet of the general government's plan or promises to give them benefits when they get here. The Supreme Court has ruled that every state must require free public education. Now the states are even granting it to the illegals their free college education. A wall is not going to do anything until we change our behavior beyond our sovereign borders and how we treat these other countries and the damage that we are causing, the destabilization that we are causing, not only in Latin and Central and South America or Mexico, but also in the Middle East. We need to change what we're doing over there. We need to change the way we are trying to treat them once they're here by giving them the magnet of all these benefits. Example, California wants to have all these people come in. Well, you know what? California, as a free and sovereign and independent state, have the right to do so. But they must be fiscally responsible for these decisions. You can find more on that on my article called The Constitutional Solution to Immigration, also published by the 10th Amendment Center. Folks, I know a lot of the stuff we talk about here, if you're listening for the first time, and I, by the way, want to welcome a new organization, Ready Man. We're going to be having them join us in the near future. We love to talk about preparedness. We'll be getting them involved as well. But, you know, the stuff that you hear us talk about, if you're brand new, is sometimes hard to hear. I ask you to keep an open mind. Think about what we're saying. It is historically ironclad. We are not giving you wrong information. As I wrap up, I just want to remind you that we have an opportunity for our listeners to get the historic information from Liberty Classroom. Go to libertyclassroom.com. We have Tom Woods, that's his organization. Kevin Gutzman's on the staff as well. He is just wrapping up a series of lectures about Thomas Jefferson. Another recent addition is a series of lectures by Brian McClanahan and about Alexander Hamilton. He's one of the problems from the very get-go and why we are where we are today. So we'll be back either Friday or later or next Monday. I want to thank you for listening. Jeff Johnson, thank you for joining me today. Mike MaHarry was with us. Mark Kreslins. I'm Suzanne Sherman for the Wasatch Report here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny.